dedicated to the Italian campaign that happened, as you probably all know, before D-Day and before the Constitution of today, the United Nations. And we're really dedicated to the 1.2 million men and women that from all over the world came to Italy to liberate the country from Nazi fascism. These were the first defenders of freedom and democracy to set foot in Europe. And as our mission as a museum is to really honor the sacrifices and preserve the legacy of these men and women. And really, we have sort of three prongs in our mission. One is to commemorate those who served. Unfortunately, less than 1% of them are still alive, given the passing of time. We're, more than 80 years from the events that we're going to be talking about today. It is to educate those who are serving, and most importantly, to inspire those who will serve, not only obviously military service, but in any way, and really trying to preserve this legacy that is in this, and the sacrifices that were made 80 years ago. So with that said, it is my pleasure today to welcome Lieutenant General Antonio Li Gobbi, who is here with us. I'm going to briefly present. He has a long and distinguished career.
It's an honor to be with you.
General Antonio Li Gobbi was born in Milan in 1954 in a family of strong military traditions. Both his father and his uncle were awarded the Gold Medal for Military Gallantry for their activities during the Italian resistance from 1943 to 1945. As a professional combat engineer officer, he served in various combat engineer units, both mechanized and alpine. We're actually going to talk about mountainous warfare and the role of the Italian Co-Belligerent Army in that. He also served with the UN in Syria and Israel, and with NATO in Bosnia, Kosovo, and Afghanistan. Within NATO, he was the Director of Operation NATO Headquarters, International Military Staff in Brussels from 2007 to 2010. At national level, he was the commander of the Italian Army Engineers and the Inspector General of the Italian Army Engineers Corps from 2010 to 2014. After reaching the rank of Lieutenant General, he retired from active service in 2015. Since 2017, he has been serving as a senior mentor for crisis management, negotiation, and mediation at the NATO Defense College. And since 2021, and quite relevant to today's conversation, he has been the director of the Center for Studies and Historical Research on the Liberation War of, and I'm going to spell it in English first, ANCFARGL, that's ANCFARGL, which is the Veteran Association of the Italian Co-Belligerent Army. Again, Antonio, welcome. Really a pleasure to have you with us today. And, I would like to start our conversation with, before we dig into the role of the Co-Belligerent Army, I would like to ask you, overall, what was the contribution of the Italian armed forces against the Germans after their armistice, right? We focus on this date, 8th of September, armistice between Italy and the Allies. And we know from the get-go there were many kind of resistance. We're not going to be able to go into details about that because of the focus of today's webinar, but I thought it would be important to talk a little bit about what happened and right after the 8th of September before again we go into more details about the Co-Belligerent Army.
Yes, thank you again for the invitation. As I was saying, it's an honor and a privilege to be here with you. And coming to the situation of the Italian armed forces in after the armistice on the 8th of September 43, we need to consider that mainly two things: the status of the conditions of our armed forces in that moment, which was not definitely bright, because in the 20 years of fascism, there was no real investment by the regime on the armed forces. Let's consider that the fascist regime did not trust the armed forces. At least did not trust two armed forces, the army and the navy. Was very reluctant to invest something in something that they didn't trust. With regard to the army, they built their parallel army, the Milizia Volontaria di Sicurezza Nazionale. And with regard with the navy, they've always been very reluctant. That was not the situation with the Air Force, what they believed it was a way, their creature, something they built. But so it was a situation where since after First World War, there was a strong reluctance by the regime to invest in the modernization of the armed force. And then the armed forces, Italian armed forces, did not enter in war in 1940, but they entered war in 1935, starting with the Ethiopian campaign, and then 35, 36, from 37 with the Spanish Civil War, when they entered on the side from 37 to 39 on the side of Franco, and then from 1940 to the war. So the situation of the forces was not really at their effectiveness. And that also can be seen how they reacted on the 8th of September. Furthermore, we have to consider that great part of the forces were outside Italy, spread in countries, areas that were occupied. I speak about France, but I speak about the Balkans also. Greece, the Greek islands, Yugoslavia, or what was once Yugoslavia, that's now broken down between Serbia, Bosnia, Croatia, and Albania, etc. In all these places, they were side to side, shoulder to shoulder with the Germans. What happened was that the armistice that was in effect an unconditional surrender by Italy was not really properly, the units were not really properly informed. Many units around outside Italy were not in really any conditions to organize the resistance. Did not get orders from Badoglio's government because especially the king was very reluctant to spread information to the forces regarding the armistice because he was afraid of the German reaction, which was foolish because the Germans were expecting Italy to pass on the side of the Allies since November.
Antonio, are you still with us? I know he was having some connection issues.
A reaction against the German forces, which were, yes, allies, but that was an alliance that was felt by many Italians, especially by the officers, the army, the navy, as an anti-historic alliance against us, a resurgimentalist. So we had sort of resistance in many parts. Some are like Polonia Island, Corfu, etc., where they tried to resist Italian units against the Germans. They were massacred. In some other parts, some Italian units, like in Yugoslavia, the Taurinense and Venezia division reconfigured themselves in a partisan division. They got division and they fought together with the Athenian partisans throughout the war. Some units that were in France managed to come back and organize the resistance in northern Italy. That was the Fourth Army. In Italy itself, there was a strong a tentative to resist mainly in Rome, where for a little bit more than 2 days, there was a strong resistance by the army against the Germans, the defense of Rome. But the fact was that the German forces were a little bit incorporated everywhere in Italy because especially they were expecting this, and they had the excuse to send forces to Italy because once Operation Husky had started, Italy was seen as the entry point against to Germany, which actually was, because that was at least how some Brits saw it, the purpose of launching the operation from Northern Africa to Sicily, Operation Husky, and proceeding, which that, as well as you know, that was mainly the British point of view, while the Americans, which had their main interest in the Pacific, and also were more interested in launching the operation in Central Europe through France, saw it more as taking over bases for in southern Italy for that allowed bombing, Air Force bombing in Germany. So direction was a little bit spread out, entering summer. There was some units mainly on the islands where it was possible to try to resist the Germans. That was tried also in Italy. Many forces, almost 1 million Italian soldiers were captured by the Germans, either in Italy or especially in the Balkans. And many of these, around 740,000, were taken to concentration camps, where they were not allowed, given the status, as you know, of prisoners of war, but military internees, which did not have the same right of the prisoners of war, and with the request for them to their resistance, which was a passive resistance, but around 40,000 of them died in those times, had an important effect for 2 reasons. We could consider what it would be having 700,000 soldiers more with Mussolini's army, but mainly it proved to the Germans that the refusal of those soldiers to go back to fight with Mussolini and accept awful conditions in a concentration camp proved to the Germans that the Mussolini's grip and the Repubblica Sociale grip on the Italians had disappeared. He had no credibility, and so that was one. Were created mainly by military units that went to the mountains and started fighting against the Germans. The main partisan leaders, especially the first period, which I mean autumn, this winter 43 and up to spring 44, were all military leaders. The resistance in Rome was led by the Fronte Militare Clandestino, led by Colonel Montezemolo, that was in touch with the crown to the south, and that was one of those massacred at the Fosse Ardeatine at the end of March 44. Let's consider that the Fossettine, the massacre of Fossettine, out of 335 people massacred. The majority groups were the Jews and the military that were all had been all imprisoned because they were part of the resistance. So that was a little bit what happened throughout outside Italy and in occupied areas. Then coming to the south, or the area with the Allies, in some areas, and we know this happened in Sardinia and in Corsica, there was an initial resistance, a combat between the Italian units that were there, that were able to, and the Germans, and the areas remained under Italian control, those two islands. And in the south, we have to consider that the units were fighting up to 8th of September against the Allies, and then found themselves in a different situation where they were not enemy anymore, but they were not allies yet, which was a situation that was very difficult to understand and to explain to the soldiers what were they for the Allies. They were not allies of the Germans anymore, and the Germans were the new enemies. That was clear. But were the Anglo-Americans allies or not? And the fact is, did the Anglo-Americans consider the Italians allies or not? Not really at the beginning. And that was fully understandable because Italy had declared war. It was declared war against France, against UK, against the United States, or against Russia. So, and then we try to get that, and that would have been very difficult for the Allies to accept. There were also political sensitivities of this, stronger by those that had been Italian enemies for a longer period. So let's consider France, which was attacked by Italy at the very late in June 40, or against the British Empire, which we've been fighting against since 1940. It was understandable that there could have been a certain reluctance to accept this changing of position. Furthermore, there were political constraints because on the side, ours was an unconditional surrender, taking on as co-belligerent. Would that have changed the conditions of the final peace? Well, that was obviously what the Italians hoped, but the Allies were probably not happy with that. Then it started the process to build a sort of co-belligerent army, and the Italian forces. The new capital was initially in Brindisi, and then offered their support to the Allies. There was an initial sort of reluctance to accept it, but then that was started, and we could see a turning point on the 13th of October 43, when Italy declared war against Germany, and so it was technically, from international point of view, authorized to fight against Germany. But then, what was the support that the Allies wanted from Italy? Did they want combat units, or they do not want combat units? So I don't want to be too long. So if you want to change,
yeah. Oh, no. This is very. Thank you. The very thorough answer, Antonio. And for anyone, by the way, that might want to learn more, again, we're not going to dig too much further on these other types of resistance, but there is a wonderful museum about the IMI experience, the Italian military internees that Antonio was mentioning, in Rome, in Via La Vicana. And it is available in English and other languages. So anyone that might happen to be in Rome and wants to learn more, there's this wonderful new museum. Now, we got to, the declaration of war on Germany by Italy, and to your point, Antonio, what did the Allies expect out of the Italian army? And we at some time, this is referred as sort of the choice, and there were different phases to for the Italian Co-Belligerent Army to rise up. We see here the ultimate 6 combat groups that were formed and their patches. But yeah, can you take us sort of through how the Co-Belligerent Army came into being after the declaration of war on Germany? What were the main phases of its rise into action?
Yes, well, the rise of the Co-Belligerent Army, and we are now looking especially at the army, but the process was undergoing also for the other forces, but it was in a way simpler for the Navy and the Air Force, in a way. I will start with the meeting between the Italian Chief of Staff and General Alexander on the 6th of October 1943 in Santo Spirito, where it was made clear that what the Allies would expect was to consider 3 kinds of forces, 3 kinds of contributions by military forces. One was the combatant forces, okay, but they really were not at the beginning very interested in that. The second group was units for communication and coastal defense, which to allow communication, to allow logistics support, etc. And then a third group, a sort of labor force to allow the support, logistical support in the ports, in ports of entry, rebuilding of roads, etc. On the other side, the Italians were more interested in trying to provide combat forces in order to prove that they were capable of being part of the liberation of the country. And in this scope, initially, it was authorized at the end of September, I think 27th of September 1943, it was authorized the formation of the first primo raggruppamento motorizzato, first motorized brigade. They called it first, hoping there would be others. It didn't come so. But it was clear in the meeting of Santo Spirito with General Alexander that apart from that, the general idea of the Allies was not to have more than that unit, unless, for the time being, until Rome was liberated. On that, point also, you know very well that the expectations of the Allies regarding the speed of proceeding through Italy have not been met. They would have expected at the beginning to arrive to Rome by the end of 1943, which, looking at the map, it could seem logical, because if you think that in September they landed in Salerno on the 9th of September, and it's probably, I don't know, less than 300 kilometers as a crow flies from Salerno. It's probably 200 kilometers as a crow flies from Salerno to Rome. But the procedures were very slow. In this, we have to see how the forces have increased the Italian contribution. We have to put it in coordination with what was going on the wider theater. Because the Italian forces contributing to the operation grew from combat forces, grew from the first motorized brigade that was 5,000 men to the 6th combat. We arrived in April 45, when we had over 500,000 soldiers. So there was the army, around 400,000, there were 66 battle combat groups of each one 9,500 men, so roughly 60. There were the 8 divisions, auxiliary divisions that were logistic divisions, and I think we'll go back later on to explain what they're, and other support forces. There was the Navy that was providing support, security to the movements of the port, and security to the other forces on the Allied navies. And there were 80,000. There were the Air Force, 35,000, and Italian Air Force was used in support, not in Italian theater, but was used in support to the Yugoslav partisans. That's also in order to avoid confrontation with the Air Force of the Social Republic. But how that it grew, the first part was that we had this first motorized brigade, not very effective. In fact, they was just grouped up, not a lot of training, actually. We have to consider that also great part of the logistic that was not very good already on 8th of September, but the logistic of the Italian units was taken away by the Allies in order to provide support to the and sent to Yugoslavia. So that put the situation of our forces even. But again, the first group was engaged. I mean, the first time in December, 8th of December, 43, in Montelungo. First time it didn't go very well. They repeated the operation on the 16th. Okay. Well, it showed that at least Italian soldiers were able to fight, but was it because the Italian soldiers were good that we had some increase, or it was also for something else? And the fact is that the Italian front was not a priority for many of the allies. For the United States, the first priority was the Pacific theater. And after that, if they considered Europe, we know, and you know better than I do, that there was different views between the Americans and the Brits regarding the continental strategy of the Americans and the Mediterranean strategy of the British Empire. So the British Empire had more interest in proceeding a campaign in Italy that was very much by Churchill, and if you want, we can go. While the Americans looked more at an intervention in Germany, through France, to direct to Germany. And on the other side, you know very well that Stalin was very much against the operation in Italy, and he was in support of the operation in France. And we can see that the increase of Italian forces fighting alongside with the Allies went in parallel with Allies unit taken away from the Italian campaign to reinforce the operation in France.
And Antonio, yeah, let me chime in there. Yeah, that was anticipating my next question. You related how the campaign was a support. It became a supporting campaign after liberation of Rome.
Yes.
To that front, what was the impact of the opening of the French Southern Front, right? What we know as Operation Dragoon, originally named Anvil, to the contribution of Italian forces to what Italy wanted, to your point, to the combat and to the liberation of the country, sort of north of Tuscany.
Well, yeah. So the fact is that already when Operation Raincoat was planned, the 7 divisions were taken away from the Italian campaign, 4 US and 3 UK divisions, and were diverted. And this was already in November 43. Those were replaced by the French 4 divisions. They were replaced by the Polish Second Corps. They were not in the, and also by that Italian brigade that went under fire for the first time. Look at the timing. It was used in combat the first time on the 8th of December. Then we passed from the Italian first mechanized brigade, motorized brigade, to the CIL, Corpo Italiano di Liberazione, Italian Liberation Corps, which was initially 14,000 people, men, then arrived to 25,000. In March, April 44, we had this switch from the motorized brigade, 5,000 men, to the Corpo Italiano di Liberazione, initially 14,000, then 25,000. That happened in April 44. But when we saw that it was necessary to reinforce a little bit, and the front was, there was even more and more requirements for the French front. And then that was also in cooperation with when General Alexander, this asked to the Allies, mainly British and the US allies, that was end of April 44, to change the attitude with regard to Italian units and be prepared also to provide equipment and arms to the Italian soldiers. The next passage from the Cooperation Corps that fought mainly on the Adriatic side, because actually also for political reasons, they did not want the Corpo Italiano di Liberazione to be part of the liberation of Rome, which happened in July. So the Corpo di Liberazione was online from middle of April to end of September 44, and fought mainly on the Adriatic side. Main battle was in Filtrano. We passed to the next stage. That was the stage of the battle groups, starting in the combat groups, starting in September 44. But that was over. We have to take into consideration that on the beginning of July, there was the decision to withdraw other forces from the Italian front to support the future launching Operation Overlord. And so from July and beginning of August, 44, other 7 divisions, including the 4 divisions, French colonial divisions, French Liberal Division, 1 bomber and 23 fighter squadron were moved from the Italian front to prepare for the French front. Let's consider also out of the 7 divisions, there were the 4 divisions from colonial French divisions that were with people from the French colonies in Northern Africa, which were probably not perfectly equipped, but were the best organized among the Allies' army to fight on the mountains. We have to consider that when the idea was to use the forces that were already engaged in Northern Africa, which made sense. It made sense because those forces were there. It made sense for the United States because they didn't want to withdraw forces from the Pacific. It made sense, especially for the Navy, that didn't want to have movement US from one side to the other, bringing forces and switching forces from. But those forces that had won successfully in Northern Africa were forces organized and equipped to fight in a desert, in a plain, motorized forces mainly. And that's what they found a big problems in moving and fighting in a mountainous area like the one of the Italian Apennine, especially in wintertime. While those colonial forces were good in that. And obviously the Italians had a tradition in fighting in the mountains, so it was very useful at that point also to move to. There were 7 divisions going out. Let's put in 6 combat groups that were not called divisions for political reasons, obviously, which they had to have almost 10,000 people, each one, 10,000 soldiers, but were trained at an attitude and an habit of operating on the mountains. So that's also something needed to be taken into consideration when it was decided then to put together this six combat.
Thank you.
And yes, and that was also thanks to what I mentioned, the intervention of General Alexander already in April, asking to supply those Italian units with British equipment, which
British
made a
equipment.
difference.
Thank you, Antonio. And just conscious of time, I wanted to ask one last question and then open to the audience. So, obviously, Italy switched side and managed through the role of the Co-Belligerent Army to fight alongside the Allies. This was in a complex political landscape at the time, right? There was 20 years of fascism that you had mentioned, that many Italians had gone through, and an ongoing civil war in the north. How did the existence and action of the Co-Belligerent Army influence the broader perception of Italian national identity and loyalty, both domestically within Italy, but also among the Allied powers?
Say again, because it was the communication was not that good.
No problem. Yeah, no,
the experience of this yes.
Yeah, my question was, given the complex political landscape within which the Co-Belligerent Army was deployed and fought through the peninsula, uh, how did that influence, the existence and action of the army, the perception of Italian identity at the time, and loyalty both within Italy among Italians and, in relation to the Allied powers?
Well, obviously, the fact that there were fighting through Italy and going together with the Allies, there were soldiers, Italian soldiers, fighting shoulder to shoulder with the Allies, proved that we were not being invaded, but by a foreign army. We were not just a battlefield of foreign armies, but it was an effort which we were part. An effort we were part of, and obviously limited part, but the Italian forces were part of it. We were not just an army that surrendered, that had been defeated, but it was an army that had been able to stand up again and fight again alongside with the Allies. And that was also important because on the northern part, there was a so-called Italian Social Republic that had established its own army. So it was important for the legacy that in the south, the Kingdom of Italy, that was the continuation of the previous, had its own army to fight. So it did matter. It was important. In the post-war period, it didn't get the relevance it probably should have had, because the main importance has been given to the resistance, and that not for the military effect of the resistance, which was important in itself, but for the political impact of the resistance and the political importance. So that the war probably is not being it's not been given the activity of the Co-Belligerent Army has not been given the right relevance in in the memories of Italy, but we should bring that up together. Anyway, from a military point of view, that experience was fundamental to create that attitude and make so that then the Italian armed forces became part of the alliance. We were together with we were one of the 12 founding nations of NATO, and that would not be so if there hadn't been that experience of co-belligerent army during the period 43-45.
Thank you, Antonio. And now, it's a chance for anyone that would like to ask a question. Please feel free to introduce yourself and ask.
Hi, this is James McFarlane, and thank you for that. That was very interesting. I just had one thought about what you were saying about the Corps being remembered and looking at them in their British uniforms with the Savoy King's flags. Were they associated with the monarchy and the king, and post-war Italy becoming a republic? Were they associated with like the king? Was my question.
Well,
Antonio, we lost you.
Okay.
Antonio, can you hear us?
in the very beginning, but that because the political situation was such that that it was not considered by many political leaders right to continue to fight in an army that of the government that was the government of the monarchic regime. The situation changed after the so-called turning point of Salerno, when in April 44, when the government changed. There was not anymore the Badoglio government, was a government representing all parties, and there was also a support by the Communist Party to the combat, to continue the operation and liberation Italy. So even the Italian Communist Party, that was linked to the Soviet Communist Party, after the Svolta di Salerno, supported that effort. And that occurred on both sides, in the south, and also with the creation of the Comitato di Liberazione Nazionale Alta Italia, National Liberation Committee, Northern Italy, where almost all political forces got together, cooperate, and cooperate also with the government in that was in Salerno at the time of the. In the meantime, as you know, also there was still the monarchy, but in fact, the king was had given away, handed over a great part of his responsibility to the prince, to Prince Umberto, which was not compromised with the fascism as his father was.
Thank you, Antonio, and
thank
you, James, for the question. Any other question from anyone in the audience? If not, I have one additional question, Antonio, if I may. So you mentioned obviously that there was a major impact post-war of the co-belligerent army, and that allowed Italy to be a founding member of NATO and obviously the European Union. Within the Italian army, right, where you served, obviously post-war, there was also the continuation, right? Like my understanding is that like it's felt that the modern Italian army that we have today in 2025 sort of started with the co-belligerents. Is that a correct understanding?
I lost you at the last part. You were broken.
Yeah. So
The
I
modern
was
Italian
asking,
army?
sort of, it's derived directly from the co-belligerent army. There is a continuation there.
Well, yes, yes. In a way, yes. It was very much so in the immediate after war, and that was reflected very much in the reform of the army in 1976, when the army was deeply restructured, going to a form of increased mechanization, etc. And they wanted to give to the all new units the name and the flags of the units that had fought during the Liberation War. And again, now, or recently, last year, some units that were newly formed have been given the name and the flags of units that were part of that co-belligerent army. So yes, that experience, and that tradition continues to stay alive in Italian.
Thank you. Unless there is any other question, I would like to again thank you, our speaker